Hello everyone, welcome back to another session by K21 Academy. Today our expert trainer will be talking about Kubernetes volumes, persistent volume and persistent volume claim. So let's get into the video.
So how do you use the volume in Kubernetes cluster, right? There are three main resources. We make use of that, and then that is how we store or persist our data in Kubernetes. One is persistent volumes. At the very high level, PVs are how you represent storage in your Kubernetes. They provide you as a link to your external storage in the backend, right? Volume claims are like tickets that grant a pod access to a volume, right? You make use of a ticket. If I just have to explain it to you, like at the using the real world kind of an example, right? So there are volumes which is already made. Well, for example, there's I am in my IT department, and maybe I have my laptop and I want to make use of external storage device. So I will go and ask my IT team, hey, can you provide me my external hard disk? Right? I'm not talking about Kubernetes. I'm just giving a general example, real world kind of scenario, so you can try to relate it with Kubernetes volume. It says, okay, the admin beforehand should have bought different size and shapes of external pen drives or storage devices, hard disk. Maybe some from, one from EMC, one from Western Digital, one of, maybe Pure Array SSD, of different shapes and size, 32 GB, 50 GB, 60 GB, right? Now, the IT team, the IT admin has those external storages. I, as the end user, I want to make use of that for my device. I'll say, can you give me some external storage? I want like 40 GB of a pen drive. And then the admin will say, no, I can give you, provided you come with some format, you've come with a request letter, or you open a ticket which says what is the requirement you have, what is the access mode, what is the capacity, what is the size you want. You give me the ticket. Maybe I will see if I have any matching pen drive, I will allocate it to you. I mean, that is how in the real world it happens with our enterprise, right? So if I need something, I open a ticket to my IT team, and then they will evaluate and they say if anything is, they have it available, they'll give it to you. Something similar. Our cluster administrator, the storage administrator will create volumes of different types and sizes, right? Maybe of 5 GB, 10 GB, 20 GB, whatever they are. To map the same volume made available on the Kubernetes cluster, Kubernetes administrator creates those volumes beforehand, before our pods can consume that. And there are volumes made of different shapes and sizes kept ready. This is called as static way of doing things, right? Static provisioning. There are two ways we can do, static and dynamic. We will come to that. So there are volumes made available. Now my pod wants access. Pod as in me, the individual. I want that pen drive, right? So the way I can request for that is with the help of a ticket, which is nothing but your persistent volume claim. So in the claim, you define what do you want, and then like what is the access mode, what is the size. I create the ticket and I give it to the IT team. He says, okay, this is matching, and then he will allocate me a pen drive, for example, for me to use, right? Similar. So volumes are made available by your cluster administrator. Volume claims are the requests or the tickets what we create to access those volumes, right? And for a volume to be created, we should already have what in the backend, the storage volume created. So when it surfaces on the Kubernetes cluster, it is called as persistent volume PV. It's a API object what we create on Kubernetes cluster, which is mapping back to what? To the real external storage, right? We make use of PVC to access that volume, and then our pods reference the PVC, and that is how they get access to the volume, and they can store their data there. The pod goes away, the volume continues to remain. It can be attached to different containers or different pods and made available. There is storage class. What we discussed so far was static way of doing, where administrator, cluster administrator, Kubernetes administrator creates those volumes beforehand and keeps it ready. A cluster administrator has created 10 GB of volume and kept ready even before the pod requested for the access. The pod is asking for maybe 3 GB, but there are no volumes matching 3 GB, and maybe the 10 GB volume will get allocated to that, wasting around 7 GB of space in that. We don't want the volume creation. In the large cluster, we can't expect the cluster administrator to keep creating the volumes of different shapes and sizes every day. We don't know what the requirement is. What about the volumes? Can they get created automatically? Dynamically? Can Kubernetes talk to the backend storage provider and get those volumes created on the go as and when we require? Yes, we can do that. It is done that with the help of storage class. We will see what storage classes, they make the volumes dynamic. So we've talked about persistent volumes. They are plugins like your volumes. PV's lifecycle is managed by Kubernetes. PVs are cluster resources that exist independently to pods, right? They can be provisioned statically by your administrator or dynamically by your storage class, right? So the few words are like before, and pure PVC is the request for the storage created by your user, right? So as we know, Kubernetes does not give you data persistence, just out of the box. We need to have some storage. Few consideration for that is you need to ensure that storage must be available on all of the nodes, right? For example, the one way is maybe if you're using some cloud storage, you should be able to access. You should have your node should have your internet access, for example, right? Or maybe if you're using NFS, the mount should be available as well. So you should be able to mount it on any of your server, stuff like that. And you should also ensure that your storage cluster is separate from your Kubernetes cluster. If I have maybe my NFS server, maybe if I'm using NFS as the backend, if that server is running on my Kubernetes master server itself, that's usually we do for our testing purposes, right? If I lose my master, I'm losing anyway the Kubernetes cluster. I'm also losing my storage cluster as well. So for your production grade and other things, you should have your storage cluster separated. It should even survive your Kubernetes crash as well, so that your data is persisted and it is available. So what happens is your cluster administrator creates your volumes, PVs beforehand, right? Of maybe coming this PV of 2 GB coming from AWS, this PV may be coming from Google, this or maybe coming from NFS, Azure, different shapes and different sizes or different storage providers, right? In the backend, we already have the storage volume. To map that, to make it available on Kubernetes, we have our cluster admin created something called as persistent volumes. They are made available, created, like our IT admin guy went and bought different pen drives from different vendors and it's available. Pod wants to use that storage. The way we reference it is the developers who write this pod. This provisioning of your volumes is done by your cluster administrator. The claims are created by whom? Your developers, right? So developer will say, hey, I need access to a volume which has maybe 10 GB and read-write access mode, right? And once that claim and your volume matches, they are bound to each other, and then that claim can be referenced inside your pod. Inside the pod, we make use of persistent volume claim to reference that particular volume and persist our data. We're going to see how it works. There are different modes for persistent volumes. One is file system, another is block, right? There was a question, do we need to format it and stuff like that? So if the use case is to use it as a raw device, you can mount it as the block. Or if you use cases as the files, you can mount it as the file system. I think file system is the default way. There are different access modes available. How does this volume should be available and mounted onto your node? Volume is the external thing, right? So wherever the pod gets created, that volume will be mounted. What mode it should be mounted? There are 3 modes as of now. The 4th one is going to come in a new versions. Read write once, meaning this mounted as read write once by one node. Read only many, meaning many nodes can mount this volume as read only. We have read write many, meaning this volume can be mounted as read write by many on different nodes. Right, volume is an external resource which is getting mounted, correct, on our node. There are different modes in which we can make use of volumes. One is RWO, read write once, read only many, and read write many. Of course, they have different use cases for that. So the way, how does you make use of the volume? First, we understand what is a volume. Storage volume, which a storage administrator has created. I want to use that to store data. To make that available inside my Kubernetes cluster, I create something called as persistent volume, which is a Kubernetes API object, right? Which provides me the link to the backend storage. That is called PV. First, I create that PV. In that PV, I mention where is my storage coming from. That is the example here. I'm creating a persistent volume, naming it whatever I want to. And in that, I'm defining few spec. I want 1 GB of the access mode where when the volume is mounted on a particular node, I want it to be mounted as read write many. And where is the storage coming from? Which is the backend storage provider, which is a soft storage provider. It can be AWS, GCP. In our case, it is NFS. Right? I'm linking now NFS/OPT/SFW on the NFS server kubeadium master to this PV wall. This PV wall, 1 GB will be allocated at this particular path on this particular NFS server. That is the link between the external storage and the Kubernetes volume. That is one point. Second, we need to create a volume claim. For the pod to use the volume, it needs to have a ticket or a reference number, a persistent volume claim. Claim acts as a ticket or reference to access that particular volume. So we have to create volume claim. We create a volume claim. This is the claims, the metadata. We have in the spec the access mode, right? When I want, the claim is where I am writing, right? The developer is writing. When I say what is that I want, how much of storage do I want, what is the mode I want. So I mention the request for storage. I want 500 MB of storage of a volume where I can store my pods data. And the access mode, I should be able to mount it as read write many, right? That is where your volume claim. And you need to define that volume where in your pod spec and mount it into your container. So that is what we are doing here. You can name it whatever you want, name whatever you want to your volume. And in the pod specification, I'm making use of a volume. I'm naming it anything I want. This volume, persistent volume, was already created by my administrator. To use this volume, I created the volume claim, and then only when things are matching, it will be bound. In my pod, for my pod to make use of this storage, I've in the pod specification, I've mentioned volumes. Can name my volume just like I'm naming my pod, whatever name I want to. I'm naming my volume so that I can reference the same name where inside the container as well. So I'm naming my volume. It is irrespective of what PV name and PVC name is all of that. I'm naming the volume and I say, where is this volume coming from? It is referencing your persistent volume claim reference. I'm giving the claim name. This is the claim name what we created. And when I access this is bound to this particular volume, right? This is the reference link to that. And where inside the container I want the volume to be available. I want it to be available under /usr share mount. Which volume I want it to be available? Here. Under the pod specification, I can have different volumes as well. So how do I identify that with the name of volume? Right? I can have more volumes here. I can have multiple volumes, right? I can have multiple containers where inside the container, inside the same container NGINX, I can have different mounts where I want to store, right? But how do I identify each of the volume? I will identify with the volume name inside where? Inside the pod. The persistent volume name is different. The name of referencing the pod is different. Hope that is clear. Okay, this is the one example what I have of a persistent volume, the kind as persistent volume. The name of that is demo. We can also have labels for our volumes. I've just showed that as example, just added some label to the volume. Just like we can add labels to any of our other objects like your pod, services, deployments, you can also add labels to your persistent volumes as well. That was one point. And under the volumes, we have under spec, we have capacity, we have access mode, and from where the storage is coming from. Access mode, I want it to be read write once, meaning when the volume is mounted, I want it to be read write once onto a node. I want 10 GB, the capacity is 10 GB. And where is this storage coming from in the backend? Is the host path. Host path meaning whichever node that pod will get created, on that node, this particular path is where we want this volume to be created. Now again, this will be like, it's not like if I go into that particular node one, worker node one and look at /mnt/data, I will not see 10 GB of space there. It's thin provisioning. As and when it increases, the size of that will grow, right? I'm creating persistent volume of capacity 10 GB, read access mode as read write once. Which is the storage? Where is the physical storage coming from? Where is the volume coming from? If I was using AWS, Elastic Block Store, maybe I would have come and mentioned that here, right? Like AWS, Elastic, etc. And then parameters specific to that, right? Like maybe the volume ID, which I've created and I've got it and stuff like that, right? But then I'm using what? Host path. That is only right now what I have. The host path meaning on the host wherever the node will get created. Let us create what? This volume. If I do kubectl apply, this volume PV is created. To make it available inside my pod and to access it, I need to have the volume claim. Can I see a little bit information about the volume? Yes, you can. Can I do kubectl get PV? It gives us some information. It says, okay, what is this? The name is this. The capacity is 10 GB. The access mode is read write only. There is something called as reclaim policy we didn't talk about. What happens when the PVC gets deleted or the pod gets deleted? We don't want to make use of this volume. What should be the policy? retain or delete. Retain means it retains it, then you have to manually go and take a look at it, right? And what is the current status? Is it available or anybody else is using it? Right now, nobody is using, there's no claim. We have a volume. As a Kubernetes administrator, I have created a volume of 10 GB inside. Can I do describe the PV? We can. It gives me from where it is coming, what type of volume I'm using. It is the host path. But if you're using something else, you would have given the description here, right? A little bit of information when you do what? The describe. Okay, let me open the volume claim. I'm creating a persistent volume claim. Name of that is demo PVC. Two things in the spec, the access mode and the request, resource request. Access mode is read write once, storage request is 3 GB. What do we have here? We have a 10 GB volume already available. And this one, I am requesting for 3 GB and access mode is read write once. The access mode is matching. And the minimum criteria, what I'm also asking is also matching. That's the only volume I have right now in my cluster. So the moment I create this claim and this PV will be bound to each other. Let us see that happening. If I do kubectl apply from file demo-pvc.yaml, it's created. Let us list that information. I'll say kubectl get PV, PVC, show me both of them together. It says, okay, you have a 10 GB capacity. The status was available. It is right now bound, right? Let me do this separately so it's easier to see. Earlier it was available, now it is bound. Bound to whom? A claim coming from the default namespace, and the name of the claim is demo PVC. And then if I look at the details about the PVC, it says, yes, the status is bound. It's bound to this particular volume named demo PVC of the capacity 10 GB. So PVC is bound to this particular volume. Now let's make use of that inside our container. So we created the volume. I do not have any kind of storage available. I have not set up my NFS server. I looked at the host path, right? I've created a 10 GB volume. I've created a claim. I said I needed some space, 3 GB read write mode. Administrator had a 10 GB created. It is bound. I want to make use of that in my pod. I do that at two levels. One at the pod spec level, right? And one at the container level, at where inside the container I have to mount it. Under the spec of my pod, that's at the level, same level of the container, right? I have volumes. I have named volume. I can name it anything I want, right? Where is this volume coming from? You reference the volume claim name. The claim name what we created above was demo PVC, right? If there are many different claims, you use whatever name you want. Now maybe there was another claim name here, another claim called a demo PVC. I can have that, right? I wanted to mount it under somewhere else. Then it leads to confusion. So that's the reason under the spec, whatever volumes you have, you name them. Where is this volume coming from? It is coming from this volume claim. Where do you want this volume to be available inside the container? You come to your containers. Inside your container, you mention the volume name and the mount path, which is the volume name. This is the volume name, which is the mount path where you want inside your container. You specify that here. Now this was another volume which was coming from somewhere else. I wanted it to be maybe under only /usr/app, for example. And this name would be different. Can't have the same name. And I mentioned this name here as well, right? I hope we understand, we're clear about the volumes. Of course, I would not have one more keyword called as volumes here. Sorry about that. It would look this way. At the spec level, we define the volume, we give a name, and where is the storage coming from? We give the reference to the volume claim name, whichever claim name we want to use. We are using a demo PVC as a claim name. Now, where do we want this volume to be available inside our container? You mentioned it as volume mount. You mentioned the path where you want to be available and the name of volume, what you are using it here, right? Let me create. One more thing I've done in this is we looked at the node name selector yesterday, right? I've added the node name cube node 1. I think I should rename it. There is no name called as cube name. Now this pod will get created on the worker node 1 because I'm asking it to do so. Let me quickly create it, then we will see what happens. Okay, now this pod is running, and let us do a exec into it. How can we exec into this particular pod? I can do this kubectl exec, give me interactive terminal to this pod. I want to run bash. Right now inside the pod /usr/share/nginx/html. This is the mount what we've used, right? And /mnt data is what we have used. That is where the file will get stored from. So if I do this, if I maybe touch file1 underscore from container, just to if we have persistence, let me exit out of here. Let me go where ssh2 worker. I have that file created here, where on the host path. I had given the host path and I had given the node name. That is where the pod got created on the node 1. And this is the file what we created from within the container. Now, what we'll do is we will remove that pod. Let's do kubectl get pod. Let's delete the pod. Pod got deleted, but is my file still there? The file is still there. Now, I can make use of the same claim and I can, create that another pod which is referencing that, and then it will get the files which were created from here. So if I do this again, I have another pod I'm creating. This the name is different, and I also wanted to go to my worker one because that is where I've used the type as host path, right? It expects that to be available on that host path. I'm creating another pod just to show the persistence that the file is already there. We verified it here, and we can make use of that. Instead of that, what I will do is in the PV we had mentioned the host path, right? And now let me exec into this kubectl. Let's wait for the pod to get created.
So guys, this was our trainer, and if you want to learn more about the terms which you could not understand, or if you want to learn more about Docker and Kubernetes, then we have something really special for you. We have our free class on Docker and Kubernetes certification, and this certification will definitely lead you to higher paid jobs. So all you have to do is log on to K21Academy.com/K8S02. Yes, after that, you'll be seeing this kind of page. You just have to click on book your free seat now. Select your event date whenever you're available. Enter your name, your email address, your phone number, and click on yes, save my seat. After that, you'll be seeing this kind of link. You can save this link, add it to your calendars, and I will see you in this free class. Till then, take care and keep learning.